thanks so much, and thanks to everybody for being part of this particular session, and I'm really looking forward to an interactive session, an interactive conversation with everybody, and I think it's an extremely important topic for us to
yeah, so just thanks for being here. Thanks to ClassFlow for providing some support for this conference. This is our inaugural Learning Revolution conference, intending to bring voices together from a variety of different learning worlds. We're having a ton of fun with this, especially at learningrevolution.com. But appreciate the opportunity that Blackboard Collaborate also provides to host this kind of a virtual event. So those of you who are here, this is a chance to indicate where you're participating from. Look to the left of the map. You're looking for the star icon. You're going to click on it twice and then click on the map. And then you can put a note in the chat. I'm coming live from Asheville, North Carolina, where we've had rainy weather today, but looks like we're going to have sun for a while. India, there we go. We've instantly become international. Carlo, you're in Canada, right?
Yes, Toronto.
Okay, so we're not only international, we are now spanning 3 countries. Feel free to keep to post in the chat when we move forward where you're from and any questions or comments that you have. Okay, so now I'll turn it over to you and let me know how I can help.
All right, so thanks again. I noticed some of the icons are now, I guess, X dots, so people are prevented from using them. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to open everything up, and I hope that's okay, Steve, that I do that. And so what that means is that everybody can make use of anything they like on the Blackboard platform. So I think it's an opportunity for us to, you know, to explore what this medium will allow us to do. And I use actually this same platform when I do my online teaching, and one of the things that they've told us to do is to make sure that we don't give access to a lot of these things to the students, so that their focus will be solely on what matters, which is, you know, in that particular model or worldview is what the students want to say, and so, or what the instructor needs to say. And so typically I just open everything up, so feel free to make use of whatever you want to make use of. The chat is usually a really powerful feature. And I find that what happens is that a lot of the more interesting topics and conversations happen spontaneously in, you know, different ways throughout the Blackboard platform. So you're, you know, not prevented from doing anything. So I'm not sure how many cameras we currently have open or how many mics we currently have open, but if we can open them all up, not sure, Steve, if you'd like me to do that. So 6 is the max, and are they all open now, Steve?
They are, and what happens is if we reach the limit, then the icon goes away for individuals. But we can take up to 6 right now.
Okay, perfect. So what we'll do is if people would like, you know, you can turn on your video, and you'll notice that there's a video button there, and you can actually click on that, and then we'll be able to see who you are and where you're from when you're speaking, if you choose to do that. The talk button is there, so all you have to do in the top part of the screen there, there's a little icon. You just click that, and you begin talking. When you're not talking, though, it's probably a good idea to click it so that there's no feedback. I know they have a feature that prevents that type of feedback from happening, but just in case it doesn't always work as well as, you know, at least in my experience. So you can do that. The other thing is the chat box. So if you notice, there's a little chat box. There's a small triangle at the bottom. And so if you like, just go in there and you can type a message. So for example, I'm just going to type hi, hit enter, and there is the chat. So if you want to ask questions, or if you want to, the conversation to go in a different direction, feel free to, to make use of everything we have. So thanks, Brooke. So Brooke's got a smiley face there. So again, I'm hoping that this session will be more interactive, and it'll develop into a conversation rather than a one-way type platform. And I think that's consistent with what I'm hoping to spread, which is this whole notion of learning and love, and this whole idea of the willed curriculum, and this whole notion that we should begin with ourselves, this holistic view of where we need to go, and that it's important for us to not focus on what one person wants, the direction that one person wants the conversation to go, but that we as a community co-create what this session will look like. And so I think it's extremely valuable for us to, to constantly keep that in mind. So I have something that I'd like to share, and I'm fully prepared if people want to go in a different direction or ask a question or move us in different ways, that we have that emergence to this session and that flexibility to co-create our learning and our time that we get to spend together in this particular community. So I often tell my students as well that, it doesn't matter what the state wants us to learn or what the university wants us to learn, but what matters is that we're a group, we've come together. We need to empower ourselves and to feel empowered and to feel that what we have to say matters, right? And again, it's this holistic notion of coming back to ourselves and beginning with ourselves. So as a way of starting, I'm just going to read what I put together as the description for this particular session, and I'm imagining that it resonated with some of the people in the room, and that's why you're here, and that's fantastic. So here's, in this interactive session, we will explore what love has to do with learning, and unfortunately, love is a term that's often not used enough in mainstream schooling. And so in the spirit of holism, we will begin with ourselves and attempt to come to a deeper understanding of how important of a role love plays in learning. And, there are all kinds of formal definitions of what love is and how love applies to either one particular area or a different area. For example, in a discussion about love, Jack Miller in his book borrows from Christopher Phillips, who discusses 5 different forms of love, and Jack Miller adds a 6th to it. And the one that Jack Miller adds is, self-love. And the others I'll share with you as well. So the first one that Miller writes about is self-love. Love of family is the ones he starts to borrow from Phillips in Socrates in Love, which is a book written in 2007 by Christopher Phillips. In that book, he talks about love of family, love of friends, love of strangers, something called agape, and eros. And of self-love, Miller talks about how we need to begin with ourselves, that we need to love ourselves before we can love others. And then he talks about, he writes of love of family, which is more natural and a spontaneous form of love. And then a third type of love is love of friends, which is also what binds communities together. And then a fourth type of love is love of strangers, which was inspired by the Greeks and served to ensure that if you needed a place to stay when you were off somewhere, you could count on strangers to house you. And in turn, you were expected to do the same, right? And you can imagine in a world where you would go off, it would be helpful to have that type of relationship with strangers, to take care of each other when people are away from home. The fifth type of love, which is agape, is love with no expectation of reciprocity. So, it's like an unconditional type of thing. And a sixth is eros, which is universal love that goes beyond the individual. So, those are kind of formal definitions around, at least how a couple of theorists see the whole notion of love. So, that's one way of beginning when you're talking about love and how it relates to learning. But another is to just come back to ourselves, a more holistic type of a model where we begin with ourselves, where we start thinking about what does love mean to me, and how does love apply in particular context, right? What happens to me in situations where I love learning? You know, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi talks about this whole notion of flow, right? Where you're just in the zone or something like that. And so does love play a role in when you're doing something, all of a sudden you just lose sense of time and space and you're just in flow, right? You're doing things in that way. And so just to continue with the description I started, to this end, I will share my thoughts on the willed curriculum. So I wrote a book called The Willed Curriculum. And essentially, you know, I think that when people talk about curriculum, they talk about a whole bunch of different things in relation to curriculum. They talk about the planned curriculum, the assessed curriculum. And I thought that we needed a way to talk about curriculum. You know, often when people talk about self-determined learning or personal learning or unschooling, they often say, well, there's no curriculum. And I think that that scares a lot of people when we use terms like there's no curriculum. And so what we have to do is we have to find a way to talk about curriculum, you know, for those who are interested in curriculum in a way that's more accessible to them from their particular perspective. So I created the term and coined the term the willed curriculum, which essentially means that there's always a curriculum. You know, curriculum often is used to relate to an externally imposed type of thing, right? Somebody tells you what to do, when to do, how to do it, where to do it, for how long. Then they judge you based on what you've done and so on and so forth. Whereas a willed curriculum is a little bit different, right? A willed curriculum is one where the learner is empowered. The learner decides what to learn, when to learn, where to learn, how to learn, whether to opt in or opt out. And they have this, they follow their will, they follow their internal will. And so I thought that often if we use terms like there's no curriculum, people get scared off, and we have to come back to then, well, wait a minute, there is a curriculum, and what we're going to call it is a willed curriculum. So we have a way of referencing that, of referring to that. So when people say, well, what are you doing with your, you know, what are you learning about? And it's not that, well, we don't follow a curriculum. Yes, you do. You follow your own curriculum. And I think that legitimizes and, you know, gives credence to a lot of what, you know, people who are interested in personal learning and self-determined learning all of a sudden have a language to connect with this, right? And learning in a loving way is authentic, creative, and empowering to the learner. This largely stands in contrast to an approach to learning that is top-down, externally imposed, and filled with manipulative teaching learning strategies. So I think that, you know, on the one hand, when you have love, it's extremely powerful. And if you know, I asked myself the question when I was writing my book, how do we learn best? And one of the responses I got, you know, in my mind was, we learn best when we are following our own will, right? We're following our own passions, when we're doing what we're interested in, when we're doing it, you know, in mainstream school, it's called engagement, right? When we're engaged with what we're doing. But in mainstream school, what they mean by engagement is that somebody external to you engages you, right? So they do something to you. And so what I'm interested in is not so much of you know, a personalized learning where an external body personalizes something for you, but in a type of learning that's more personal, right? And you know, there's a difference between personal learning and personalized learning. And I'm just going to try to clarify that for you in you know, a piece that I have here, or a quote that I have here that I'm just pulling up. And you know, here's how personal learning plays itself out. And this is an article that was titled "Preparing Students to Learn Without Us" by Richardson, 2012, and this is what he writes. Many educators cite an important difference between personalized learning and personal learning. The latter connotes a deeper degree of autonomy for the learner. Some, like Stephen Downes, a senior researcher at the National Research Council of Canada and a longtime education blogger, see that as an important distinction. Autonomy is what distinguishes between personal learning, which we do for ourselves, and personalized learning, which is done for us. And Downs tweeted that in 2011. And so I think, this distinction is huge, I think, and it's extremely important for us to keep in mind when we're talking about this whole notion of personal learning, which we do for ourselves, versus personalized learning, which is done for us. And a lot of what is done in the mainstream is personalized learning, where somebody, they know where they want to get us and they personalize it to get us there, whereas personal learning is very different, right? Personal learning is where we, we learn about these things in very personal ways. So I don't actually have the link handy, but there, Steve's got it there, and it was part of that. So thanks for that, Steve. So at this point, let me just take a quick break because, as I said, I'm hoping that this will be more of a conversational type of a interactive process, and just ask if anybody has any comments, any questions that they'd like to raise, and you can just type it in the chat if that's what you feel like doing, or you could just click on the talk button and we can begin our conversation that way, because our time together is fairly short. So I want to make sure that we can co-create a session and that, people will have opportunities to share their thoughts and, questions or comments and, contribute to a lot of this type of conversation. And so I'm just reading through some of the chat. So Steve, you go ahead.
So I think this is really interesting, and I want to encourage those who may feel a little awkward about speaking up to be bold and brave. You can raise your hand like I've just done, clicking on the hand icon in the participant window. You can put a note in the chat, or we can give you the microphone. Carlo, I'm interested in, there's a nuance here in the term love, right? Which is, as I think about parenting, I can love my children in a way that says I care so much about them that I kind of smother them. Another form of love is I love them so much that I allow them independence. And I keep coming back to Martin Buber's I, thou, or you, thou. This idea that there's a difference between how I see you as someone independent, capable of making your own decisions, or you're someone sort of attached to my own perspective and only seen through my own eyes. So it feels like that's a really important concept, the love concept with regard to education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And along those lines, I just want to share with you a quote from Alfie Kohn. And, he's more of a progressive rather than someone who's along the lines of, John Holt or an unschooler or somebody who's interested in self-determined learning. But I think a lot of what he says resonates with people in the unschooling community. And he talks about this whole notion of unconditional love. And so part of the problem with, a definition of love that's conditional is that, of course, it's conditional, right? And that sort of, for a lot of us, detracts from the whole notion of what actually is love once you get that notion of unconditional or conditional in there. And I think he, in 2005, he writes about unconditional love, and he says, the second sort of love is unconditional, and of course the first is conditional. It doesn't hinge on how they act, whether they're successful or well-behaved or anything else. I want to defend the idea of unconditional parenting on the basis of both value judgments and prediction. The value judgment is, very simply, that children shouldn't have to earn our approval. We ought to love them, as my friend Deborah says, for no good reason. Furthermore, what counts is not just that we believe we love them unconditionally, but they feel loved in that way. And I think this is huge. And even Nell Noddings, talks about, in this whole notion of caring, is somebody who doesn't feel cared for being cared for if you're caring for them, right? And I think that it's important that on the one hand, there's somebody who's doing the loving, but on the other hand, the person has to feel loved, right? And that's a huge difference, right? And if they don't feel loved, even though you're being loving, are they being loved, right? You know, that's, I guess, the big question that we have to think about. So the prediction, meanwhile, is that loving children unconditionally will have a positive effect. It's the right thing to do, morally speaking, but also a smart thing to do. Children need to be loved as they are and for who they are. When that happens, they can accept themselves as fundamentally good people, even when they screw up or fall short. And with this basic need met, they're also freer to accept and help other people. Unconditional love, in short, is what children require in order to flourish. And again, I think that, you know, oftentimes people even talk about, or often people often talk about tough love, right? And they say, well, you know, I'm doing this because I love you so much. And, you know, the question we have to ask ourselves is that a contradiction, right? If somebody is doing something in that way out of love, but it's a type of tough love, right? It's not an unconditional love. It's a love in order to get somebody to do something, usually. And here's a new document that just came out in Ontario, actually, in 2014. And, you know, the title of this document is Achieving Excellence, a Renewed Vision for Education in Ontario. And what's interesting about this is, I just want to share with you that, you know, the difference between what I'm talking about philosophically and from a particular worldview with a more positivistic worldview, a worldview that's more in line with, you know, a capitalistic perspective or a neoconservative, neoliberal type of perspective that, you know, is functionalist rather than one that's more in line with, you know, an unschooling philosophy or a self-determined philosophy. So in this section, they're talking about well-being, and the goal is promoting well-being. And so then they go, why do we need this, right? So the question now becomes, why do we need to ensure well-being in the life of the child? So most people would say, well, you know what, well-being is a good thing, right? Shouldn't we want them to be in an environment where we're concerned about their well-being? But here's on page 15 of this document where they start talking about why do we need this? And let me just read you this one sentence to give you a sense of how, to me, morally and ethically, you know, I guess their view is skewed, right? So over the past 10 years, we have seen growing evidence demonstrating why students' well-being is an important element of overall student success. And here's the sentence, and this is 2014. Students cannot achieve academically if they feel unsafe at school or are bullied online. Now, you know, I think this is really telling, right? This sentence alone is, you know, a clear example of where this particular philosophy is coming from, right? It's, you know, to me, it's an unfortunate type of direction that people are heading in when they speak in this way, because basically what they're saying is that the reason we have to be concerned with children's well-being, first sentence, why do we need this? Well, it's because we want them to achieve academically, right? And I think there needs to be, you know, there's a simpler reason why we want people, well, we want to be concerned about people's well-being. And it's not so that they can achieve academically, right? It's not so that those in positions of power who say, you know, you need to learn these particular things, and we're concerned about your well-being, because if we're not concerned about your well-being, you're not going to be able to learn about the things that we want you to learn about, so you can become productive members of society, which in a lot of cases, some might argue would mean that you would become corporate slaves, right? We would turn human into human capital so that you could then, you know, become what the state wants you to become, or what big business wants you to become, or what somebody else wants you to become. And so to me, it's very, you know, shameful that in the world we live in, and, you know, they start off by talking about how in Ontario we're leaders in education and we're doing so well in this area and that area and improving here and improving there. But you know, the whole premise, the whole paradigm that we're working from is a morally shameful one in my perspective, right? It's not about love. It's not about doing things unconditionally. It's about doing things in order to get people to ultimately serve the state in particular ways, right? And it's pretty clear that this is what we're interested in. And I've read similar arguments, you know, from the Ministry of Education around why we have to have breakfast programs and why we have to feed young children who are in junior kindergarten and senior kindergarten who come to school hungry. And the reason why we need to be doing those types of things is not out of love, but because, you know, we need to ensure that these particular individuals are in a, you know, in the best position to learn, right? And so the argument for why we should be doing things like that, I think, is unfortunate, where I think the argument should be more along the lines of, you know, we need to be doing things because it's the right things to be doing, right? And so, you know, let me just pause again because I want to make sure that people have opportunities to interject and to comment or add their own thoughts. So does anybody have any thoughts or comments or questions around anything I've said or anything anybody else has brought up in the chat? Brooke, you go ahead and click on the mic.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead, Brooke.
Hi, so Carlo, as you know, I agree with much of what you're saying, and the philosophy is something that we practice in our home and in our lifestyle. The challenge I have is still being a student currently. It's something I'm passionate about, this learning with love, this empowerment. How to navigate this as a student myself, where I still have teachers, facilitators, mentors that are coming at me with a very different pedagogical philosophy, and how to maintain my self-love within that and love the journey still, and maintain that passion while it's just not, the relationship is sometimes, I find, a challenge to me to navigate that when it's being facilitated in such a different way than I am feeling I would want.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely, and I hear you, and that's, you know, that's definitely something that's difficult. But I think, you know, being a part of a community like this and coming to sessions like this and connecting with people who have very similar beliefs gives you the confidence then to say that, you know what, we have serious philosophical differences here, right? So I'm thinking philosophically in one way, my instructor is thinking philosophically in another way. And that, you know, it doesn't make things easier, but what it does do at least is give you confidence that you need to continue doing what you're doing. And that what you're doing is not, you know, it's not that you're, you know, that what you're doing is diminished or is diminishing in any way, right? But that you have confidence that although your perspective and the instructor's perspectives may be conflicting, that you have a lot of confidence in what you're saying. And even, you know, students in PhD programs, as you know, still meet up with that tension. And so it's extremely valuable also in the sense that not only are you thinking about how do people learn best and about education and learning, but you're also embodying it right now. And so what you're embodying is the positive part of it, and you're also embodying the negative part of it. And so what we need to do is we need to ensure that going forward and moving forward, we're not going to be perpetuating this same type of philosophy, right? The same type of worldview. But we're going to do things in very different ways, and we're going to continue to do things in very different ways. I hear exactly what you're saying, Brooke, because when I was a student, I felt it in the same way. I didn't like school. As a young person, I didn't like school throughout my whole schooling, right? Which is, you know, even when I was doing my master's and my PhD, I felt that, you know, people were still telling me what to do, what to read, how to think about these types of things. And I had disagreements, right? And at first, you know, my schooling history is a little bit interesting, and I'm going to share it with you. And I'm not doing it to be a braggart, but what I'm doing is I'm sharing it to you just to make a point, right? I didn't get into university after high school because my grades were too low. And, you know, at first it was something that I was ashamed of, but now it's something that I'm so proud of, right? It's something that I'm most proud of. And the reason why I'm so proud of it is because I didn't just buckle and conform to what they were telling me to do, right? So I didn't just, you know, play the game, so to speak. But what I did was, and now that I recognize looking back, even though I didn't think of it at the time, but I recognize now looking back that I was resisting. And I was resisting, you know, in ways like Michel de Certeau talks about, in very powerful ways. And I didn't just conform. So I'm really proud that I just didn't, you know, follow what their direction was, and that I, you know, started to think in my own way. And eventually I did, you know, get into university. And of course I didn't know then what I knew now about how easy it is to get into post-secondary institutions. You know, for example, there's Athabasca University in Canada, which is a fully accredited Canadian university. All you need to get in there is be 16 years of age and you're automatically in. If you're younger than 16, you need a note from your parents. So regardless of your past schooling history, you don't need transcripts or any of those types of things. So there are, you know, there are options, and of course there are all kinds of different options. That's just one of many. And, you know, I didn't know it then, but, you know, my path was I went to college and boosted my grade up, and then I went to university. And so, you know, when I was doing my master's, ultimately I did my master's in 1 year and my PhD in 1 year while I was working full-time as a high school English teacher. And again, I'm not trying to be a braggart, but I'm just trying to say that we don't know what people's full potential are, right? And so like you, I didn't really feel enthralled by schooling, you know, even though my instructors were telling me that this is extremely important. I should be really thankful to be in this room because I'm getting so much knowledge from it. You know, and I didn't feel that way. And, you know, I think that it's extremely difficult when you experience one philosophy after having experienced a philosophy that's more in line with love, personal, self-determined, and that type of thing, right? Do you want to say more about how you're embodying this and you know, maybe the differences you feel when you're in an environment where learning is imposed on you as opposed to an environment where learning isn't?
Sure. Well, a former teacher, now stay-at-home homeschooling mother. We are following the WIL curriculum. My boys are 3 and 5. Carlo has been an influence on me throughout this approach, but also through teaching, things didn't feel right the way they were unfolding in the classroom. Learning so much from my children as they came into my life, and just from what you're speaking about my current experiences as a student now, I do find it's very reaffirming to my views as I'm feeling these other philosophies being imposed. I find it stifling and challenging to stay passionate about the process. And it's reaffirming to the approach I'm taking with my children, because I don't want them to be experiencing what I am with the stifling feeling where I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to engage, but I cannot do it when the path has been imposed on me. I want to follow my own path and let the learning emerge as opposed to have it be imposed someone else's way.
Right. Thank you very much for sharing that. And, you know, it's a difficult and unfortunate thing because clearly learning doesn't have to be that way, right? The best definition for learning I could give you is one that comes from John Holt. And, you know, Holt talks about learning, and his definition of learning essentially is that learning is living. So Holt in 1989 writes, "Living is learning. It is impossible to be alive and conscious, and some would say unconscious, without constantly learning things." And so we have to recognize that we're all capable of learning, right? And that we all learn in this way. And that learning is something that happens, you know, all the time. And it's not something that's exclusive to an institution. And in fact, you know, even Ivan Illich talks about how if schools are dangerous for no other reason, they're dangerous because they try to convince people that the only way to learn something is to go to a formal institution, right? And that's clearly not the case. So one of the things I think we should, ask ourselves is, what would a loving learning environment look like? Does anybody have any ideas about that? And again, you could either put it in the chat, or you could, simply pick up the mic and share what your ideas are. In order to pick up the mic, you just click the talk button and go from there.
Oh, I could share an experience, Carlo.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
My son, who's 5, part of the process with us having him home is, I'd say, been deschooling myself, coming as a former teacher, trying to not impose my teaching on him. And recently he was trying to get a better sense of numbers and number sense and exploring things with blocks. And the old me, the old teacher in me, would have intervened and said, no, arrange them like this and order them like this and count them like this. And instead I sat back and I watched, and actually it was a conscious decision to just sit on my hands and let him discover. And he approached it in a way I never could have imagined, in a way I never could have presented. And he came to the same conclusion, just wonderfully on his own. I imagine how many children would get there on their own way, a different way, without having that intervention from somebody else.
No, absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing that. Anybody else want to add to the conversation, or ask a question, or make a comment? Again, you could feel free to pick up the talk, or click the talk button on the top left-hand corner and share your thoughts or comments. And so I'm just asking, what would a loving school look like? And, people even talk about schools that are focused around critical thinking, right? And you can also hit the hand up button if you like. And then that will, where it says raise hand, and then that'll alert me that you have a comment, and then I'll move to your particular comment. But even if we think about notions of critical thinking, a lot of times in schools, what people talk about is, we want young people to be critical thinkers, right? Of course, who doesn't want young people to be critical thinkers? But in the context of schooling, is that possible? What happens if a child in a school actually challenges or questions or says, I don't want to do this? If they start thinking critically and engaging in what is being imposed on them, what will happen to them, right? Will they get a detention? Will they be sent to the office, asked to leave? Who knows? But we talk about critical thinking, and we want people to be critical thinkers. But then in the context of schooling, do they actually have opportunities to do this, right? Betty, you go ahead.
Yes, I'm thinking about, I'm at the elementary level, and I'm thinking about the Reggio Emilia schools in Italy, where the preschoolers they have the environment, the classroom environment is just beautiful. It's filled with colors, everything from nature, where the children are actually using rocks and stones, and it's just a beautiful environment. Curtains, and the children explore. They explore something. The teachers just put out things for them to explore, and they listen. The teachers listen to them, and as they're talking, they're writing down what they're saying, and the learning and the planning emerges from that. So then the teachers pull in the materials and things for the children to pursue whatever their interests are. They document everything. They take pictures of the stages of this work that they're doing, and they write down the students' words, and they put them up in a display, so that instead of having produced materials on the walls, there are children's pictures and their work on the walls, and so that is their learning is emerging as they are playing. It's just a form of playing. They think it's playing, but they are actually learning and growing and developing through that way.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, of course, the big question for me then would be, in the context of this, how empowered are the young people actually, right? Could they walk away? Could they start something new? Are they being judged and graded and marked and that kind of thing? And those, I think, are fundamental questions. And, you know, again, where does the center of freedom come from, right? And, you know, the types of schools that I am sympathetic to are along the lines of, you know, Sudbury schools or, you know, like the Albany Free School and Free Schools, Democratic schools, and places where young people are truly free to create, co-create, decide what they want to learn, when they want to learn, whether they want to continue with a particular activity or not. And I think that without that type of freedom, in my mind, no matter how loving the environment is, it might be difficult to actually have that, because are the children actually being respected, listened to? Are they actually, you know, being trusted to move forward in ways that they believe they need to move forward in, right? And here's a quote from Bell Hooks that really resonates with me, and she's writing about love ethic. And in writing about love ethic, Bell Hooks in 2000 writes, "A love ethic presupposes that everyone has the right to be free, to live fully and well. When conflicts arise among families or, you know, communities, Hooks suggests that healthy families resolve conflicts without coercion, shaming, or violence," right? And so, you know, in any particular environment, even in a Reggio environment, the question that I would have is, how free are the children? How empowered are they? You know, can they continue and move forward in ways that they decide to? Can they just walk away and choose to do something very different? And I know that a lot of the times Reggio is connected with holistic type of learning. And, you know, there's you know, that respect and that loving type of an environment from the external being imposed. But coming back to this whole notion of, you know, the question that Alfie Cohn asked, but do they feel loved in that way, right? Do they feel listened to? Do they feel that whatever interests and passions they have is valuable and is worth pursuing? So instead of doing math, what if I choose to do, what if I want to leave and skateboard? Am I allowed to do that? If I'm not allowed to do that, then the question for me becomes, why not, right? Why are we creating a particular hierarchy where skateboarding is good and or bad, and math is good? You know, in the world that we live in my part of the world, it's, you know, literacy, numeracy, those types of things. And it's not even any type of literacy or any type of numeracy, but it's a specific type of numeracy, right? And, you know, in my personal life, I'm, you know, school math, I'm not, you know, very interested in school math, right? I think school math is, you know, the formal school curriculum is a waste of time. For me, in my life, it always has been. But I think math in my life is extremely important. So I'm a genius in the math that I need to live my life. And the math that I need to live my life is very different than the math that you would need to live your life or somebody else would need to live their lives. And so I think what we need to do is we need to focus on what's appropriate for a particular individual and to allow people the respect and trust to, you know, follow whatever passions they have, right? And, you know, we, you know, often we talk about critical periods. And, you know, the truth is that, you know, here's a quote that I'm looking for here. So here, Krashen and McMillan write that there is not a critical period for learning to read, for example. Much research and many individual cases support the view that late intervention based on free reading can work for struggling readers, that there is no critical period for learning to read, and that improvement in literacy can occur at any age. But this isn't what we're being told, right? We're often being told that there are, you know, critical periods, and if you miss out on certain critical periods, then you're in huge trouble. and there's other research that sort of focuses around that as well. So, Betty, how would you respond to what I'm saying in terms of this whole notion of Reggio Emilia? Would it be consistent with that, or in your experience, or
Well, I think that there are certain boundaries. I think the idea is that the children are allowed to explore, excuse me, and create. However, I don't know if they decide that they're not going to do that. My assumption is that they would be allowed to choose what they would want to do. And these are preschoolers, so I don't know that much about it as to how much freedom they have to make choices. In looking at the reading that I've done, they have, they tend to be able to choose and make decisions. However, they are working in groups. I don't tend to see them working individually. I don't know if they do or not. Where a child can decide they want to do something different from everybody else and work by themselves. I don't know. I just don't know. But my feeling is that that children should be allowed to pursue their interests. I strongly believe that. It's very difficult to do that in the public school system because we're bound to a particular curriculum, and then we're tested on that curriculum. So I don't see that kind of thing happening the way the present public school system is set up.
Right. Okay, thank you very much for that. And I'm just going to a comment in the chat that I read at the 7:40 mark. Liz put it up, and it says, yes, lots of discussion with opportunities for feedback and validation. And I'm just wondering, and I know people are talking about that in the chat. I've noticed that there's other notes, up a bit around that same particular topic, that we need to have discussion, feedback, this type of thing. But is that just another way of, another type of manipulation, or another type of grading, another type of judging people? And, if people ask for it, I think that's one thing, right? So if somebody comes up to you and says, look, I'm having trouble getting this painting just right, and I know that you're a painter, and so I want you to, to sort of help me with this, then, it would be legitimate for you to say, okay, this is it. But if it's top down and somebody is just saying, well, now it's time for me to, to comment on this. And I think, it comes back to Brooke's example with her son, right? So should she be directing how to play with that particular manipulative? And if it's asked for, that's one thing. If it's not asked for, then it's something totally different once again, right? Liz, you go first. So just click on the mic and...
Hi, Carlo.
Hi.
Yeah, I agree with you. It has to be, it can't be unsolicited feedback, right? It's when somebody wants feedback that it's valuable. But this kind of links back to, and I didn't catch the very beginning of this conference, but somebody was speaking about Martin Buber's I-Thou theory. Mm-hmm. And I do like that theory. I think that resonates with my understanding of relationships. But I also like the ideas in Ubuntu, which is, I exist because of you. And to me, it's the relational dynamics that help me in learning. Perhaps it's because of a lack of self-trust. I don't know, but I like being able to test my ideas out and get feedback and validation. Not that I want somebody else to tell me something. It's almost like you just need somebody to reflect your words and your thoughts back to you so you hear them from another perspective. And then it again allows us, or for me anyway, that's a good learning environment for me.
Right, and I think that's a really powerful point that you're making. We're not trying to say that, or at least I'm not trying to say that if you do it that way, then you're doing a bad thing personally, right? You shouldn't want that validation. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that the learner needs to decide a lot of this, right? It's self-determined, and the learner needs to determine how they learn best and how they want to learn about it. So I'm not trying to replace one hierarchy with another, or one worldview with another worldview. What I'm suggesting is that if a particular learner says, this is how I want to learn about this, perfect, right? I want to be lectured to. That's a legitimate way of learning. And if somebody else says, well, I don't want to be lectured to, I just want to figure it out on my own, move away. That's also legitimate, right? So not only is the form self-determined, but also the content, right? So I think somebody should, and we all, some of us would think, well, you know what? If we don't force people to learn math, nobody will ever learn about math. That's not true, right? We live in a numerate world, and we'll learn the math that we need to learn to move forward. And there are people who love math. There are people who, and they should be doing math, right? Why should they be doing skateboarding or something that they have no interest or passion in if their passion is math? That's legitimate, right? They need to make these types of decisions. We shouldn't be imposing curriculum on people and forcing them to do things that we would want them to do, right? And to me, a school that's based on love would not impose like that, would unconditionally accept the direction that people want to go in, trust and respect that, and move forward in that particular way. Alan, your hand is up. You want to share?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. So I'd just like to know your thoughts, and I'll throw this out to anybody else as well. Between the idea of forcing kids, or learners of any age really, to learn what you think they should learn, and the idea of just kind of waiting for them to come to you with the things that they want to learn and saying, hey, I'd like to know more about things that can help. There's a whole range of, as the mentor adult figure with children, can suggest some things and suggest some approaches from things, and try to do that in a way, hopefully succeed in doing that in a way that's not kind of cajoling or coercive, even in some sort of tacit way, but it's a genuine invitation, because I might feel that there are kids who want something that they themselves haven't defined, that they might be interested in things that I've got in my experience that they don't have in theirs yet, so they don't even know that they want it. So this whole idea of being able to invite and suggest without it being manipulative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, sorry,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's fair, to invite as long as the invitation is welcomed, right? And as long as we're not imposing on other people. And, it's a fine line, right? My thing is, let's just deal with human beings as human beings. Part of the problem with teaching is, and any teacher program, when people start in teacher programs, what they tell teachers is, okay, now you're becoming a teacher, so you're no longer who you are, right? So we're going to tell you how to act, how to talk, how to walk, how to behave, how to interact with human beings. And there's a way that we would do it in a more genuine, natural, authentic type relationship. And then there's how teachers are expected to do it, right? And so my thing is, let's just treat humans as humans. So if you had a friend and you were at a coffee shop and you bring up a conversation and you just said, look, I've got this really interesting thing that just happened, well, you listen to how the other person is responding, right? If the other person's cue is, tell me more, then you tell them more. If the other person's cue is, yeah, I'm not really interested in this, well, then obviously you'd probably shift your conversation and start talking about things in a different way, right? So I think we have to become really skilled at continuing to listen to people's cues. And if people are not interested in what we're saying, let's respect that, right? And not try to impose it. So as long as we're doing that, I think, it's fair to, to do that, to invite in that way. But again, there's a fine line between imposing and doing that. And I just want to read what Allison says in the chat. Maybe, Allison, you'd like to pick up the mic and say a little bit more about this, because I find it interesting as well. Is I think there are ways to offer unsolicited feedback. Example, in a conversation with a teen about how things are going for her, a caring adult can bring up feedback, type thoughts for discussion, right? And again, do you want to say more about that, Allison, or? All right, so we'll leave it at that. If you do, just click the hand up button, and I'll give you the floor to do that. But in my mind, again, it's part of the same type of thing, right? It's all part of, is it welcome or not? And if it's not, then we have to think about not imposing in this way, right? And there are ways to do things in very gentle, loving ways, and then there's ways to do things that are much more, aggressive. And I think the aggressive usually turns people off. And so we have to be totally willing to accept that sometimes people don't want the type of help that we're hoping they'll accept. And, I think we have to be prepared for that. Any other thoughts? I'm just looking at the clock, and I noticed that we're starting to, to come close to the end. So, again, think about what would a loving school look like. And I think a lot of us would say that, if, it's like the Beatles song, all you need is love. So if we're following loving principles, if we're following, this direction, we're on the right track, right? And if people are loving and if people are feeling loved, then that's a very positive thing. And so if we agree that that's a positive thing, and I think many of us would, how would we create a learning place or space that really respects that? And again, for me, it would have to be the willed curriculum, self-determined learning, and personal learning, right? We have to give people the freedom and the will to empower, to feel empowered, to be empowered, to move in places and spaces and directions that they feel they want and need to move in. If we're not doing that, then I think we're just being, as Noam Chomsky says, commissars, right? We're just being foot soldiers. That's, Chomsky calls teachers commissars. And we're just perpetuating the main, the status quo, right? We're doing more damage. We're continuing to wound people. And I think that schools do wound people in very deep ways because they lose sense of who they are, what they want to do, where they want to be. Even something as simple as writing a formal essay in a 5-paragraph essay or whatever it is, it's not neutral. None of this is neutral. It's all very values-laden. And it actually changes people. When you get them to think in a way that a formal essay is, and of course not everybody writes in that standard form, thankfully, because, people come up with very creative ways to share their thoughts and their messages that don't conform to that particular structure. But if somebody thinks in a different way and you're forcing them to think in that particular structure, what you're doing is, you're challenging their own self-worth, and you're also changing their bodies, minds, spirits, and emotions in very fundamental ways, right? And that could lead to dissonance within their own core, which I think is a very sad thing, right? So anybody else want to make a final comment, or because the time is we're about a minute away, and so as Steve is suggesting, it's time to close. So thank you very much. I really appreciate everybody's participation. Alice, do you want to make one final comment? Pick up the mic. All right. So thank you very much. I really appreciate everybody's time. And if anybody has any questions or they want to continue the conversation, feel free to email me at carlor@nipissingU.ca, and we'll go from there. So thanks very much. I appreciate everybody's time, and I hope everybody has a great night. Bye for now.
Thanks, Carlo. Hey, the recording will be up in about 5 minutes once everybody exits the room, and you can also save the chat if you'd like by going up to File, Save, and save the chat. Carlo, I clapped for you. I hovered over the smiley face and went to applause. That was terrific. I'm sorry I had to cut out for a few minutes to take care of a technical issue on one of the keynote rooms, but I'm going to turn this off now and close the recording, and then encourage you to leave the room when you can so that the recording will process. Thanks, Carlo. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Steve. Bye for now.